Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blend podcast. I'm your host Mike Ruff, and this week we're taking a look at the fast growing EV market and what it takes for a garage to successfully tap into it. To do that, we've called in on the expertise of none other than Matt Cleevely of Cleevely Electric Vehicles in Cheltenham, and I'm pleased to say that he'll be joining us later in this episode and at the Blend itself, which takes place in Birmingham on the 7th of October. Before that though, what's your long-term business plan? What do you want to be doing in 5, 10, 20 years time? How much thought have you put into what happens when you want to move your business on? It's something that Tim Benson of Oldfields Garage in Leominster has put a lot of thought into, and I'm pleased to say that he joins us here today on the Blend podcast to give us some insight into why planning your business exit is so important. Tim, welcome to the Blend podcast. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for inviting me to be part of it.
No, not at all. We've been looking forward to having you on. Before we get started on exit plans, though, you're obviously very well known within the garage community, but perhaps we could take the opportunity to find out a little more about your garage. Could you give us a brief overview of your current setup and how it came to be what it is today?
We run Oldfields Garage Services in Leominster, which is in Herefordshire. Sort of a medium-ish size garage. We've got 10 employees. Mum and Dad started it back in 1991, and I joined the business about 13, 14 years ago. Effectively, our journey was that we reached a point in our old site where I either had to decide to get involved or not really, and that was the decision that I took, and we moved to our current site, as I say, 13 years ago, and have not looked back since, really.
What was that deciding factor in the end?
Well, I've always been around cars. I went away and did other things. So I went to uni sort of a little bit later. I started my career in parts at a main dealer. Went back to college and uni, and then went off and did a few other bits and bobs, cosmetic surgery, IT, and so on. And when I sort of moved back to the area, I my friends and family were here, which was the main draw at that time. But as I started being more involved in the business, I think the potential for improvements and the potential for developing the business was what sort of hooked me in, really.
And how has the business developed under your leadership?
Yeah, so I think because I don't come from a technician background, I look at everything from a customer point of view. I did a business degree, so obviously I look at the business in its entirety. And I think, my view was that there was an opportunity really for us to develop into a much more customer-focused business. I think, our business, our core customer base was getting older, and that was going to pose us a problem. The new site gave us a chance to reinvent ourselves, if you like, and, put in a nice customer reception, have a nice clean tidy workshop, have everything sort of open plan and visible, and customers could see, and that's really where I've sort of got more involved.
So let's move on to the topic that you'll be covering at the Blend in October. Could you introduce us to your presentation? So
I'm going to be talking about what steps we've taken to enable us to exit Mum and Dad from the business, still benefiting from it long term. It's largely ignored, and I would say, the majority of cases in the garage industry, people don't think about it at the beginning, which, if you study any form of business planning or business modules, your exit is almost the first thing you should think about, but it isn't what happens within the trade.
For whatever reason, within the independent garage sector, it almost seems a bit strange to talk about your exit plan. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree, and if I'm honest, when I think about my own exit plan, the issue with an exit plan that's definitive is that you don't take in the sort of the positional the position that you're in, and what are the options at that point. I mean, we're a second generation family business. I would absolutely love it if one of my children would come into the business, moving forwards. Now, obviously, my youngest is 5. I can't plan for that at this stage. So effectively what I've got to look at is what are my options and how do we do it. And I'm going to share a little bit about what we did to enable Mum and Dad to exit, and the things that I'm thinking about for the future that give me the options to look at where I go sort of long term.
It seems like it's no simple thing to plan an exit. You've just mentioned, Tim, about your youngest son at 5 years old. Far too early to tell if he'd be interested in coming into the business. So how do you tackle that? How do you weigh up your options?
Well, I think, obviously you've got to concentrate on the profitability, because that is the number one thing from an exit point of view, is making sure that the business is profitable. If you're trying to sell the business, the more profit you make, the more valuable it is. If you're trying to continue the business, within the family, the more you've got behind you, the easier that transition is, and you can continue to generate, revenue from the business if it's structured correctly. And I think, my own personal exit plan is not formulated in its, black and white version, if you like. I'm thinking of 10 years' time, where do we go in 10 years' time, what do we do? And my personal sort of exit plan of our business is not black and white at this stage. However, I've got multiple options that I'll share, at the presentation that I'm looking at. And what that means is that if I can plan a little bit towards each of those options, then depending on what happens at which stage, you can move in that direction quicker because you're ready for it.
Why is that exit plan so crucial for business?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you don't know what you're going to do at the end, you can't build towards it, and it's really as simple as that. There's nothing revolutionary in that statement, but if you've got options, or you're thinking, right, well, actually what I want to do is to sell the business, well, you can't just decide in 30 years' time, right, I'm going to sell the business. Now what do I do? What you need to do is you need to think, right, I need to sell the business, so what can I do to structure my business, to organise my business, to align my business, to make that step into the next bit of where you go, really.
What is the timescale we should be looking at for future planning? You're looking at 10-year plan, but I imagine it depends on what stage of your life you're at.
No, absolutely, and everyone's going to have a different idea about what they'd like to do. Typically 10 or 15 years is a good time frame for preparing the business for exit. But if you're talking about that at 20 years old, I very much doubt that people would be planning an exit. They'd be planning growth during that stage, because obviously you've got energy and all the rest of it at that age. But 10 years for me would take me to 53. It would also take it to my youngest being 15. And I think at that point you would have a really good idea as to whether they're going to move in this direction or not. And again, the thing with a plan is that it doesn't mean that a plan is rigid. The plan can change, but you've got to take these. You've got to take these steps and move forward in the direction to enable you to be at that point where you can.
What are the options when it comes to exit plans? And I'm talking about independent garages in general. Are the possible plans as simple as either passing the business on to someone in your family or selling it to someone else? Is it as simple as that?
No, I think there's a lot more options than just doing that. I mean, it's the traditional way that you do plan your exit, but I still think that you can run a very successful garage business without you having to be involved, and systems like Garage Hive enable me to not be here all the time, so I know it can work, and it's just putting things into place that so potentially it might be that I keep hold of the business and it keeps running, and you just keep monitoring it through the systems you use. That is you've sort of more or less exited the business, but it's still ongoing. So I don't think those are the only two options, but it'd be interesting to discuss my path that I've been through and what's happened historically and where I see in the future.
So how big a part does Garage Hive play in your plans, and how different might your plans look without Garage Hive?
Garage Hive has been massive for us. I think having the level of detail that you can summarise how you're doing. That's a big factor. At any given time you can get a snapshot, this is what we're doing now, but the ability to then delve into the details, so if something isn't working as you need to do, going into that, that micro detail of what's happening and when it's happening. But being able to do it, not here, is such a big thing. So I know that I don't have to be here every single day to know how the business is doing. I know what my customers are thinking. I know what we've sold. I know how profitable we've been. I know which jobs are not working for us, which jobs are working for us, because it's all there. That data set is so powerful, and it given me the flexibility to step out of being here all the time.
That's really great to hear, and I know that the majority of those listening are already using Garage Hive, so that will no doubt come as some reassurance for those that are perhaps yet to think about their own exit plan. Tim, we'll be finding out much more about your exit plan, and we'll be able to tap into your knowledge at the Blend in October. But for now, many thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to it. And I tried to pick something that was a bit different to other people. And it's something that is an exciting topic, especially if you're at the stage where you've got 10, 15 years left of your business. That it's important to think about it.
Thanks, Tim. We'll see you there.
Cheers, Mike.
The Blend Podcast, inspiring success from within the community. Join us at the Blend on the 7th of October at the Eastside Rooms in Birmingham.
Now, when it comes to long-term business planning, you're almost certainly going to have a decision to make about electric vehicles. There's no doubt that the niche is now well on its way to becoming the norm, so much so that battery electric vehicles actually overtook diesel to become the UK's second most popular powertrain after petrol in 2022. The total market share of electrified vehicles, so that includes mild hybrids, plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles, was at 52.6% by the end of 2022. With that in mind, let's welcome on Matt Cleevely of Cheltenham-based Cleevely Electric Vehicles. Matt, how are you? How's business?
I'm good, thank you. Very busy, but good. I keep getting told that being busy is the right problem to have. But I'm good. Thank you very much for asking me to come along.
Not at all. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're spinning lots of plates at the moment and doing an excellent job at not only championing the opportunities that EVs bring with them, but also tackling the challenges and raising awareness and finding solutions. There's not many conversations had about electric vehicles without the mention of Cleevely EV, but perhaps you could provide some context as to what you've built with that brand.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So apprentice straight into the trade from school, did a 3-year apprenticeship with another independent family business down in Dorset where I lived at the time, and fell out with my boss just after I'd qualified and joined the family business that existed in Cheltenham in 1999. That's how old I am, where I was freshly 19 and worked in it with my dad and my uncle and my auntie for the next nearly 20 years quite happily. Always staying on top of the modern changes in the trade. So when I was first an apprentice, I was doing points and plugs and ignition timing and dwell angles and carburetor strip downs and all those things. And I progressed throughout my career wanting to learn and understand the newest of technology. So fuel injection, code reading, diagnostics, things like that. Did loads of courses, invested in kit. And then I did a Master Tech ATA with the IMI. And it gave me a thirst just to keep learning and keep understanding. And when EV came into the world, I wanted to know, is this the area of our trade? Is this the next big thing that I'm going to need to learn? This was 6 years ago. My dad was retiring off, so I did my EV training with Promoto at Basingstoke sort of area, and Elliot there was fantastic, and we stayed in touch. But I wanted to know more, so I bought a car, and the whole buying experience was awful. So the main dealers just seemed to hate everything about EV. I went back a number of times, and nobody could sell me a car. And I realised then, once I'd driven the car, it was a brilliant driving experience. I'm a real petrol head, but they were faster, they were smoother, they were easier to drive, they're easy to own, they were cheap to run, or they are cheap to run. And I wanted to promote that and become an EV adoption type location. So we created Cleevely EV at that point to run alongside. And and started inviting people along. We expanded motors, so that's the traditional side of the business that I was in with the rest of my family, to have its own MOT bay and work in newer environment. And EV sat alongside doing car sales and education, and we started repairing from there. So it's just been an absolute monster of a beast that's come along in the last 5 years, 6 years or so. And we've grown to seeing now 35% of our daily input of cars through the workshop is pure EV, and created a parts department and various other things along the way it's just organically grown to what the EV ownership and our customer base wanted out of their workshop. So I've learned a lot in the last 5 years.
What a journey, and a rapid one at that. Fully embracing the EV opportunity that you identified 5 or 6 years ago has clearly paid dividends. But is there anything that you'd do differently if you were to start that journey again?
I think I might have probably researched things a bit more, maybe tried to keep it a bit quieter and learnt a little bit more. But I don't think we'd be in the position we'd be in if I had. There are lots of garages that come to me and say, I've done my EV training. We say that we do EVs, but we're not seeing any come through the door. I suppose the way we've become successful, the reason we've become successful, is that we've gone out to the owners of the cars and stuck our head above the parapet, if you like, and gone, right, bring it to us, we'll work it out. Sometimes that has been the very hard way. Sometimes that's involved a lot of backwards engineering, and a lot of R&D time that we've just had to write off and learn from. But it's ultimately proved successful. So no, there's nothing I would change. Even those really stressful nights when you're still trying to put someone's expensive Tesla back together with them sat on site waiting, they all have a value and have added a value and a kick up the backside when you've needed it to find another way of doing it because the way you're doing it isn't working. And that's what I often say to garages that approach me is, if the way that it isn't working, the way you're trying to do it now isn't working for you, you've got to find another way of getting those cars in. Otherwise, you've wasted your investment with the training. You've got to go out and find it.
So EV training is really just the starting point. It sounds like you need to jump right in and actually start working on these cars to really understand them and make a profit from them. Massively. So, the training was the start of it for me. But in order to understand the cars that I hope to be working on, initially I bought my own Nissan Leaf, and that was the sort of painful experience that kicked it all off in the pinch point. And I had that car apart, and I've tested various things, and I've looked at it, and I've learnt from how the battery degrades and how you can recover some of that degradation, how you can look after the battery. There's a real depth of knowledge in that. So if you're a garage wanting to know more, own your own cars. We've got a couple of EV courtesy cars that the customers love to run around in as well. So if your customer base doesn't know that you do electric vehicles or that you're qualified in it or you're looking into it, then adopt an EV courtesy car, run it around yourselves and learn from it, get your customers into it. They'll understand what it's all about as well then. But yeah, it really is a start, and it's quite nerve-wracking at first. We all know the dangers that are involved in working on high voltage. So if you don't see those cars regularly enough and you're not au fait with how to shut them down or what shutting down means and where the voltage could be afterwards, then if you're doing one job a month or even less frequent than that, you're not going to have the confidence to ball in and be able to do a successful repair that ultimately earns you money, which is what we're all in business to do. Going back to that starting point then, what should garages be looking for when it comes to EV training?
So I think the IMI qualifications, as good as they're good, and that was a great starting point for me. It's a basic overview, and you get to, the only hands-on bit that you get to do is to take the battery out of a Prius, or to shut a Prius down, or to measure the Prius at an inverter. It's always on a Prius. We haven't done that much work on a Prius, and I know it is the most practical car to deliver these courses, where if you can physically lift the battery in and out as a one-person job and things like that. But it's not all about that. So what we're looking to develop here at Cleevely is to have a deeper dive type course that involves actual hands-on high voltage repairs of things that you will see come through your workshop because we've seen them here. That type of course is what a technician will learn from. The qualification should be viewed as just that. It is a qualification. It's giving you the foundations of knowledge, but actual hands-on repairs, deeper dives, more in-depth courses are the kind of thing that's really going to gain you the confidence you need in order to be able to carry out those repairs that come into your workshop day to day.
So often it seems that electric vehicle courses are about the safety aspects of working on EVs, which is of course hugely important, but as a business, you also need to actually diagnose and you need to be able to fix them too. Matt, we're very much looking forward to hearing you speak at the Blend in October. Could you give us an introduction as to what we can expect to hear from you?
We're at this tipping point where there's lots of garages either reluctantly looking towards EV as something that they'll need to do. I don't like the phrase, we do EVs, or we're looking to do EVs. What does that mean? Ultimately, we're all in the trade and the business of looking after cars. So if looking after cars is what we do, then the drivetrain needs to be kind of irrelevant, or is just part of it. It's not to be viewed as anything too different. A car is a car. And a lot of what we do here day to day is working on the cars, not working on the high voltage system of it. So, the presentation is about our move into the market. It's about what we've learned in the last 5 years. It's about what we've had to develop, the opportunities that have come to us, and the changes in our building that we've had to put in order to be able to work on EVs. Some of the pitfalls and the problems of offering EV repair and maintenance. So it's just a brief overview of the last 5 years worth of work that we've done. And a lot of people think I'm mad just sort of giving that IP away, really, but ultimately I've been in this trade for 27 years. I might be in it for another 10 or so, but really I want the whole trade to grow and develop and to grasp this opportunity that is electric vehicles now, because there is a huge market and a potential that the independent aftermarket as a whole can get in front of the franchise dealer network as the preferred repair option for electric vehicle ownership. And there was a recent study that was done that proved that EV owners, I think it was 60% of EV owners, will sort out an EV knowledgeable and reputable workshop in order to look after their car. I mean, that's huge, that you could lose a lot of your customers because you don't market yourself as an EV knowledgeable and educated business. So there'll be a huge, and also with the change of the franchise dealership model, where we're seeing certain brands sell direct to customers, and their own service franchises and maintenance options are missing out on that. Just enhances the opportunity that there is for the independent aftermarket to be EV repairers and beat that franchise element.
The argument against EVs that I hear time and time again is that there's not as much to go wrong on an EV. There's hardly anything to service when compared to an internal combustion engine, so there can't be as much profit in it. But you've clearly found a way to make it profitable.
So yeah, it is profitable, but it becomes a volume game. The more that you can get through, because you're not doing oil changes, so your margins in parts has disappeared. So you've got to be, I don't want to say you've got to be fast, you've got to be efficient. That's the best way of putting it. What you do and how you do it, that's how the parts department came about. We're not having to wait for components to come in. We've got a stock of components that we know we'll be needing. So that sort of grew organically in the business, not for any other reason other than to service our own servicing workshop. But they are still cars. They're heavy cars as well. So a large proportion of the work we're doing, we're selling far higher volumes of tyres than we ever did before. I think there's a stat that's come out that 20% of EVs fail their first MOT on tyres because the owners don't check them, and they often wear down to cords, or they wear far more quickly than the owners expect them to. So tyres is a big part of a business, as is steering and suspension components, ball joints and things. These cars are heavy, they wear ball joints like they're going out of fashion, which is great for us. It's just part fitting, and then you get your margin back on parts. But where we're winning currently, and I will say currently, but because of our niche, we're getting cars from all over the country, and we're seeing some random things, and we're able to charge some very good money for diagnostics for other garages aren't prepared to take on. So there is a certain amount of diagnostic work, complicated diagnostic work as well, where you can win, and main dealers are getting it wrong as well. We're getting cars brought into us for second opinions after main dealers and finding silly faults, where the main dealer may quote £8,000 to £10,000 for a repair. On one instance, it was a Jag I-Pace, and we found a broken wire. I mean, essentially, you can charge what you want for that broken wire. It's not about the time it's taken to find it, it's about the knowledge to get to that point. So if you can justify it, you can charge it, and you can still save customers thousands of pounds.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. I heard of a case recently whereby a customer had a Mitsubishi Outlander, I think it was, and a dealer had diagnosed a problem with the high voltage battery and quoted a bill of thousands of pounds for a complete replacement. Looking for alternatives, the customer actually managed to find an independent that had the skill and expertise that actually managed to track down the fault to a circuit board within the battery pack. And then they took it another step further, so they then identified the tiny electrical component within that circuit board that was actually the cause of the fault, and literally saved that customer thousands of pounds.
A big part of what we do is about finding, carrying out a repair to a modular level, and you quite rightly point out that it's an electronic level most of the time, that there is a capacitor or a chip failure internal of a circuit board somewhere that's either got a dry solder joint or has failed, and you can replace just an electronic component. Now, that's not something that we ever expected to have to do in our trade, but I suppose it's just an evolution. It's part of our trade. So we're speaking to companies like AC Tronics and ECU Testing. They're very aware that they're going to have to step up their game, and they're going to have to create test rigs in order to be able to work on these latest technologies.
You were astute enough to spot the EV opportunity 5-6 years ago. Are there any other market trends that you foresee that garage owners should keep a watchful eye on?
There's going to be a lot of electrification of vehicles, whether that's in combination with a combustion engine, however that's fueled. There's a lot of talk of hydrogen combustion and things like that. So yeah, always looking into that. I don't think that involves quite a change in business model that the move to EV has for us, but it's important to understand what that technology means for in-house. But even hydrogen combustion will come along with a battery pack or some kind of electrification to it. So the foundations of understanding high voltage, I think, are in our trade to stay now. And I've spoken to local colleges that understand that electrification in cars and high voltage training is an important part to have in an apprenticeship, and a lot of colleges offer high voltage training too. So from that side of things, yeah, that's one thing. Tyres are changing a lot because of the huge market that tyres has become with electrification as well. Other than that, I don't see anything too bad on the horizon. Whether we should be looking at flying cars just yet, I'm not so convinced, but certainly within our generation, electrification is the biggest change that's going to be coming through, and I sort of hope everyone embraces it to the level that we have, really.
And anyone listening that may be considering going down that electric vehicle road should absolutely get tickets to the Blend and come along in October to listen to Matt's presentation.
We're hugely looking forward to being at the Blend this year. I've had to book the next day or so off after the blend because that team know how to drink and how to party. So it's going to be a long few days, but thoroughly enjoyable. Anyone who wants to chat to me, as long as I'm still making sense, are very welcome to talk to me. But it's going to be a great weekend. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure chatting as always. We'll see you at the blend.
Thanks, Mike. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Blend podcast, and a special thanks to Tim Benson and Matt Cleevely, both of whom will be at the Blend in October. So make sure you save the date, 7th of October, and book your tickets on the Blend website. We've got plenty more fantastic guests lined up for the rest of the podcast series, so be sure to subscribe to the Blend podcast in your usual podcast player, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.